The relentless hum of the fluorescent lights and the sprawling open-plan office of Global Harvest Foods was the soundtrack to Sarah's life. At 28, she was a single mother to a bright, bubbly 6-year-old named Lily and a secretary in a sea of cubicles. Each day felt like a repeat of the last, a frantic morning of wrestling Lily into her school uniform, a rushed commute, and then 8 hours of being utterly and completely invisible. She was the ghost who restocked the paper in the printers, the disembodied voice that answered the phone with a polite, "Global Harvest, Sarah speaking, how can I help you?" and the silent figure who ensured the coffee pot was never empty. Her world was a carefully constructed fortress of routine, built to keep the chaos of her life at bay. The divorce had been messy, leaving her with a mountain of debt and a hollowed-out sense of self-worth. Her job at Global Harvest was a lifeline, but it was also a daily reminder of how far she had fallen from the dreams she once held. She was a ship adrift, navigating the treacherous waters of single parenthood and corporate anonymity. One particularly grueling Tuesday, the universe decided to test the flimsy walls of her fortress. The main copier on the 3rd floor, a monolithic beast prone to fits of mechanical rage, had ground to a halt. A flashing red light blinked menacingly, proclaiming a paper jam of epic proportions. Of course, it was Sarah's turn to wrestle with the machine. Her boss, a perpetually stressed man named Mr. Henderson, needed a 50-page report copied and collated for a meeting that was starting in less than 10 minutes. "Seriously," she muttered, her voice a tight nod of frustration. She yanked at the paper tray, her knuckles scraping against the unyielding plastic. The copier remained stubbornly silent, its red eye mocking her efforts. A wave of despair washed over her. It was such a small thing, a jammed copier, but in that moment, it felt like the final crushing weight on her already burdened shoulders. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, and she fought them back with a fierce, desperate will. "Not here," she told herself, "not at work." "Having a bit of trouble?" a low, calm voice asked from behind her. Startled, Sarah turned to see a man she didn't recognize. He was tall, with kind, crinkling eyes, and a dusting of silver at his temples that belied his otherwise youthful appearance. He wore a simple navy blue janitor's uniform, the Global Harvest logo stitched neatly over his heart. In his hand, he held a small toolbox. Yes," she stammered, wiping a stray tear from her cheek with the back of her hand. "It's jammed, and I really need to get this report copied." The man offered her a small, reassuring smile. "Let me take a look. These machines have a mind of their own sometimes." He kneeled, his movements fluid and efficient. He didn't just pull at the trays. He seemed to understand the machine's inner workings, pressing hidden latches and gently coaxing open panels Sarah didn't even know existed. His hands, though calloused, were surprisingly gentle as he worked. "It's always the little things that cause the biggest problems, isn't it?" he said, his voice muffled as he peered into the copier's metallic guts. Sarah found herself nodding, a small choked laugh escaping her lips. "You have no idea. Sometimes I feel like my whole life is one big paper jam." The words were out before she could stop them, a raw, unfiltered piece of her soul laid bare for a complete stranger. "I think I know exactly what you mean," he said softly. He finally extracted a crumpled, mangled piece of paper, holding it up like a trophy. "There's your culprit." He closed the panels, wiped his hands on a cloth from his pocket, and gestured for her to try again. With a tentative press of the button, the copier whirred to life. The gentle thrum of its motor, the sweetest sound Sarah had heard all day. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with a gratitude that went far beyond a fixed machine. "You're a lifesaver." "Just doing my job," he said with a warm smile. "The name's John, by the way." "Sarah," she replied, a genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time that day. As she rushed to finish copying the report, she couldn't shake the encounter from her mind. It wasn't just that he had fixed the copier. It was the way he had looked at her, the quiet empathy in his voice. He had seen her frustration, her despair, and he hadn't dismissed it. He had acknowledged it. Unbeknownst to Sarah, the man in the janitor's uniform was not a janitor at all. He was John Smith, the reclusive, enigmatic CEO of Global Harvest Foods, a man who had inherited the company from his father and had grown it into a global powerhouse. But lately, he had felt a growing disconnect from the very people who made his company successful. He had become a name on a letterhead, a figurehead in a corner office, and he hated it. So, he had devised a plan. For 1 month, he would go undercover in his own company, working in various low-level positions to see the reality of life for his employees. His encounter with Sarah had been a revelation. He had seen the quiet desperation in her eyes, the resilience in the set of her jaw. He had heard the weariness in her voice, a weariness that spoke of long hours and little recognition. And yet, she had persevered. She had thanked him with a sincerity that had touched him deeply. She was the heart of his company, the unsung hero who kept the wheels turning, and he had almost missed her. The following week, an email landed in Sarah's inbox. It was from the executive office, a place so far removed from her daily reality it might as well have been on another planet. Her heart leapt into her throat. Was she being fired? Had Mr. Henderson complained about the late report? With trembling hands, she opened the message. It was an invitation.
She was being asked to join a new temporary task force. The project was codenamed Project Empathy, and its mission was to identify and implement strategies to improve employee well-being and foster a more connected, human-centric workplace. The invitation was signed by John Smith himself. Sarah stared at the screen in disbelief. It had to be a mistake. Her, a secretary? What could she possibly contribute to a high-level executive task force? She was about to delete the email, convinced it was some sort of cruel prank, when a thought struck her. The janitor, John? Could it be? The idea was so outlandish, so utterly preposterous, that she almost laughed out loud. Curiosity and a tiny flickering ember of hope compelled her to accept. The first meeting was held in a sleek, glass-walled conference room on the top floor. The air was thick with the scent of expensive coffee and ambition. Sarah felt like an imposter, a sparrow in a flock of peacocks. The other members of the task force were vice presidents and department heads, people whose names she only knew from company-wide memos. They regarded her with a mixture of confusion and polite condescension. And then he walked in. It was him, the man from the copier. But instead of a janitor's uniform, he wore a perfectly tailored suit. The kind, crinkling eyes were the same, but now they held an air of authority that commanded the room. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice the same calm, reassuring tone she remembered. "Thank you for being here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm John Smith." A collective gasp went through the room. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. The janitor was the CEO. She had cried in front of the CEO. She had confessed her life felt like a paper jam to the CEO. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole. John's eyes found hers across the long, polished table. He gave her a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of their shared secret. And in that moment, her fear began to subside, replaced by a strange sense of calm. The initial meetings were a blur of corporate jargon and abstract ideas. The executives talked about synergy and holistic approaches and leveraging core competencies. Sarah remained silent, clutching her notebook like a shield, convinced she had nothing of value to add. But John, or Mr. Smith as she now had to call him, kept drawing her into the conversation. "Sarah, "What are your thoughts on this?" he would ask, his question cutting through the corporate speak. At first, she would stammer, offering a non-committal, "I'm not sure." But he was persistent. "You're on the front lines, Sarah. You see things we don't. What are the small things, the everyday frustrations that wear people down?"
And so she began to speak. She spoke of the broken coffee machine in the break room that had been ignored for months. She spoke of the lack of recognition for the administrative staff, who were often treated as invisible. She spoke of the soul-crushing bureaucracy that made it nearly impossible to get even the simplest tasks done. She didn't use fancy words or corporate buzzwords. She spoke from the heart, her voice gaining confidence with each word. The other executives listened, their expressions shifting from skepticism to genuine interest. They had been so focused on the big picture, on profit margins and market share, that they had forgotten about the people who made it all possible. Sarah's ideas were simple, yet profound. She suggested a kudos board where employees could publicly recognize their colleagues for their hard work. She proposed a mentorship program that would pair new hires with experienced employees. She advocated for more flexible work hours for parents and caregivers. With each suggestion, she felt a piece of her old, invisible self falling away. She was no longer a ghost in the machine. She was a voice, a force for change. And John Smith was her champion. He listened to her ideas with a focused intensity, scribbling notes and asking clarifying questions. He saw the value in her perspective, the wisdom in her experience. She was not just a secretary anymore. She was an architect of a better workplace, a builder of a more human company. The fortress she had built around her heart began to crumble, not from an attack, but from the gentle, persistent light of being seen, of being heard, of being valued. The hum of the fluorescent lights still filled the office, but now it sounded less like a soundtrack of drudgery and more like the quiet, hopeful hum of a new beginning. The ripple effect of Project Empathy was palpable. The kudos board Sarah had suggested was now overflowing with colorful notes of appreciation. The broken coffee machine was replaced with a state-of-the-art model, and a small library of books appeared in the revamped break room. These were small changes, but they were symbolic of a larger shift. For the first time, the employees of Global Harvest felt heard. And at the center of it all was Sarah. Her transformation was remarkable. The timid, invisible secretary had blossomed into a confident, articulate leader. She no longer clutched her notebook like a shield. She used it to jot down ideas that would reshape the company's culture. But as her star rose, so did the whispers. "Must be nice to have the CEO's ear," Brenda, a senior accountant with a perpetually sour expression, muttered just loud enough for Sarah to hear as she walked past the break room. "I've been here 15 years, and he doesn't know my name." The comments were like tiny paper cuts, small but stinging. Sarah tried to ignore them, focusing on her work, but the whispers followed her down the hallway like a trail of smoke. They saw her not as a contributor, but as the recipient of unfair favoritism. The very project designed to foster connection was, for her, creating a new kind of isolation. The tension came to a head one afternoon in the elevator lobby. Sarah was waiting for the lift when Brenda and a few of her colleagues approached. An awkward silence fell over the group, thick and heavy. Just as the elevator doors opened, John Smith stepped out. He took in the scene in an instant. Sarah, standing alone and looking small, and the other women, a wall of silent judgment. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes held a steely resolve. He stepped out of the elevator and stood beside Sarah, a quiet but unshakable show of solidarity. "Brenda," he said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "I hear you've been with us for 15 years. That's a remarkable commitment. In that time,
I hope you've learned that the true strength of this company isn't in its balance sheets, but in its people." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the uncomfortable group. Project Empathy isn't about favoritism. It's about recognizing the courage it takes to speak up when others are silent. Sarah has shown that courage. This new culture we're building is for everyone, but it requires everyone to participate. You can either be a part of the change or be left behind by it. The elevator doors chimed, a period on his unspoken sentence. He held the door open. "Sarah?" She stepped inside, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. As the doors closed, sealing them in a cocoon of silence, their eyes met. He offered her a small, reassuring smile, a silent promise that she was not alone in this fight. The next morning, a small box of gourmet cookies sat on Sarah's desk, with a simple handwritten note, "We're sorry." Later that day, Brenda invited her to lunch. Over salads, they didn't talk about work. They talked about their kids, the rising cost of living, and the shared struggle of balancing a career with a personal life. The ice had broken, the whispers faded, replaced by the murmur of genuine conversation and the bright, clear sound of laughter. Just as her professional life was finding its footing, her personal life was thrown into turmoil. A ghost from her past materialized one evening as she was picking Lily up from daycare. Luke, her ex-husband, was leaning against a lamppost, a smug, predatory grin on his face. The sight of him sent a jolt of ice-cold fear through her veins. "Well, well," he said, his voice a venomous purr. "Look at you. Heard you're moving up in the world. Playing with the big boys now, are we?" "What do you want, Luke?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling as she pulled Lily closer. "I've been thinking," he said, stepping into her path, "about all the emotional distress you caused me. All those years of nagging. I think I deserve some compensation. Let's say $50,000. A drop in the bucket for your new boyfriend, I'm sure." "You're insane," she breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. His smile vanished, replaced by a chillingly familiar sneer. "Am I? Or maybe I just file for full custody. Tell the judge what a mess you were after the divorce. How you can't possibly be a stable parent while you're trying to climb the corporate ladder. You know how judges are about ambitious mothers." The threat hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed directly at her heart. She grabbed Lily's hand and fled, his mocking laughter echoing in her ears. That night, she didn't sleep. The old fears, the ones she thought she had buried, came roaring back to life. He had always known how to make her feel small, powerless, and alone. The next day at work, she was a ghost of her former self. John noticed immediately. He found her in the now empty conference room, staring out the window at the city below. "Sarah," he said gently, "what's wrong?" And it all came pouring out. The years of emotional abuse, the constant manipulation, the threats, the blackmail. She told him everything, the words tumbling out in a torrent of fear and shame. He listened without interruption, his expression hardening with a quiet fury. When she was finished, he didn't offer empty platitudes or easy solutions. He simply said, "You are not alone in this. Come with me." He drove her to a discreet, elegant law firm downtown. "Eleanor Vance," he said, gesturing to the brass plaque on the door. "She's the best. I'll wait for you." Eleanor was a woman in her 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a handshake that radiated competence. For the first time, Sarah told her story to someone who didn't just see her pain, but saw a path through it. "Men like him," Eleanor said, her voice firm, "they feed on silence and fear. We will not give him either." The legal battle was draining, but with Eleanor's guidance and John's unwavering support, Sarah found a strength she never knew she possessed. He never overstepped, never tried to fight her battles for her.
but his presence was a constant, steadying force. He would leave a cup of her favorite tea on her desk in the mornings. When Lily came down with a bad case of the flu, a package arrived at her apartment containing a collection of classic children's movies and a gift certificate for a food delivery service, with a note that simply read, "Focus on Lily. We've got everything else covered." Finally, the day came. The judge granted the permanent restraining order. Luke was legally barred from contacting her or Lily ever again. Walking out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight, Sarah felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The chains that had bound her for so long had finally been broken. The annual Global Harvest year-end gala was a glittering affair. A year ago, Sarah would have been one of the invisible staff members, ensuring the event ran smoothly. Tonight, she was a guest of honor. Towards the end of the evening, John took the stage. "This year," he began, "we're introducing a new award, the Inspiration Award. It goes to an employee who has not only excelled in their role, but has inspired us all to be better, to be more human." He smiled, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found hers. This year, the award goes to Sarah Miller. A wave of applause erupted through the room. Stunned, Sarah made her way to the stage. As John handed her the beautiful glass award, he didn't let go of her hand. He turned back to the microphone, his voice resonating with a deep, heartfelt emotion. "When I started Project Empathy, I was looking for a way to fix my company. I never expected to find someone who would fix me." Sarah reminded me that leadership isn't about profits or power. It's about seeing the person behind the title, about having the courage to listen and the compassion to act. The room was silent, every eye fixed on them. "We need more people like Sarah in this company," he said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate. His gaze never left hers. "And I need her too." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but for the first time in her life, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. The applause that followed was deafening, but all she could hear was the steady, reassuring beat of her own heart. He leaned in, whispering so only she could hear, "Is it too soon to ask the company's greatest inspiration out on a date?" She laughed, a sound so full of light and happiness it seemed to fill the entire room. "No," she whispered back, her fingers tightening around his. "I think the timing is just perfect."
Spring arrived that year, painting the city in vibrant strokes of cherry blossom pink and daffodil yellow. The air, once thick with the chill of winter, now carried the sweet promise of new beginnings. On a sun-drenched Saturday afternoon, a park near Sarah's apartment hummed with the joyful symphony of life. Children's laughter mingled with the chirping of birds, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass. In the middle of a sprawling green lawn, a bright red kite danced against the brilliant blue sky. Holding the string with fierce concentration was Lily, her face alight with a joy so pure it was contagious. Running beside her, offering guidance and untangling the line with patient hands, was John. He wasn't the CEO of Global Harvest in that moment. He was just John, a man completely captivated by the little girl whose laughter was now the soundtrack to his life. Sarah watched them from a nearby picnic blanket, a half-read book forgotten in her lap. A soft smile played on her lips, her heart swelling with a quiet, profound contentment she had once believed was impossible. This was her life now. Not a frantic rush of survival, but a peaceful rhythm of love and shared moments. The ghost in the office was gone, replaced by a woman who was seen, cherished, and loved for exactly who she was. Sarah let out a squeal of delight as the kite soared higher. "Look, Mommy! Look, John! It's flying to the moon!" John laughed, scooping her up and placing her on his shoulders. "I think it just might make it, superstar." He walked over to the blanket and sat down, Lily still perched happily on his shoulders, her small hands tangled in his hair. He caught Sarah's gaze, his eyes full of a deep, unwavering affection that still made her breath catch. "A year ago," Sarah said softly, her voice filled with wonder, "I was crying over a broken copier." John reached out, his hand covering hers. His touch was warm and familiar, a safe harbor. "And I was a man lost in a corner office, surrounded by everything and feeling nothing. Who knew a simple paper jam was the key to fixing everything that was truly broken?" He looked at the woman beside him, her face relaxed and glowing in the afternoon sun, and then at the giggling child on his shoulders. This was his balance sheet now. Not numbers on a page, but the immeasurable wealth of a shared life, of a love that had grown from the most unexpected of seeds. "Mommy," Lily's small voice piped up, "can we get ice cream now? John said he'd race me to the truck." "He did he?" asked Sarah, raising an eyebrow at John. "A promise is a promise," he said with a mock-serious expression, carefully setting Lily down. As Lily sprinted ahead, her red kite trailing behind her like a triumphant banner, John paused. He leaned in and pressed a gentle kiss to Sarah's forehead. It wasn't a passionate movie-ending kiss. It was something far better, a kiss of quiet certainty, of shared history, and of a future they would build together. They stood up and walked hand in hand after Lily, their steps perfectly in sync. They were no longer two broken people, but three whole souls bound by the simple, powerful forces of kindness and courage. They were a family, forged not by circumstance, but by the profound and beautiful act of truly seeing one another. And as the golden sun began to dip towards the horizon, it wrapped them in a warm, promising light, illuminating the path to their new beginning. If this story of hope, courage, and finding love in the most unexpected of places touched your heart, we would be so grateful if you would give it a like. It helps stories like this reach more people who might need a little inspiration. And if you'd like to see more tales that celebrate the power of kindness and second chances, please subscribe to the channel and join our community. Thank you for watching.